Good evening and welcome once again to Ballot Meridian Township Treasurer Debate tonight live on HOMTV. My name is Erik Sherman and tonight is Thursday, October 20th. And we want you to participate in this evening's debate by calling in with your questions for the candidates at 517-349-1232. And you can also tweet or Facebook questions to HOMTV #BallotMeridian. So for the next hour, you will have the opportunity to ask your questions of the candidates running for the Meridian Township Treasurer race. We welcome Democratic incumbent candidate Julie Brixie and independent candidate Erik H. Lindquist. The phone lines are now open, so call in with your questions. Again, the number is 517-349-1232, or you can tweet or Facebook us, HOMTV, using the #BallotMeridian. If you'd like to ask a question of the candidates this evening, though, they must be phrased in such a way that both candidates can answer the question. You can't ask one directed at a specific candidate. I want to thank the candidates for joining us this evening, and we're going to start off with a brief introduction, starting alphabetically by the last name with Julie Brixie. Ms. Brixie.
Thank you for having me tonight. It's been an honor and a privilege to serve as treasurer of Meridian Township for these past 8 years. We've seen some really tough times while I've been treasurer, but thankfully things are improving for both our township residents and the township as a whole. The most important part of my job is keeping the township money safe. I promise to continue the fiscally sound collection and investment practices that I've put into place. Safeguarding the township's assets is an important job that I take very seriously.
Thank you. And now Mr. Erik H. Lindquist.
Thank you. It's great to be here too. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Erik Lindquist. I am an accounting professor at LCC. I've been in accounting professions and executive positions for 34 years, and I'm also a certified fraud examiner. My name will appear on the ballot with no party affiliation, which means that if you do vote straight ticket, you can still vote for me by selecting my name on the ballot. I hope to share with you this evening not only my views on financial management for the township, but also to help you understand my views on other important township matters dealing with development, small business matters, and the issues of customer service that have been discussed in our campaign.
Thank you very much to you both. When we don't have questions, then phone calls or tweets, then I do have a list of standard questions that I will be using. And with all of the questions, our candidates will have 2 minutes to answer. Both candidates have, when they both have answered, then after the question, we will offer you a 30-second rebuttal to anyone who wants to take it. We will begin alphabetically with the first question and then alternate who answers each following question, back and forth rotating. But we do have a question right now from a caller, and that caller is RJ from Okemos. Go ahead, RJ, with your question.
Thank you. I was wondering if the candidates could give me a general overview of what are the duties of the treasurer and the treasurer's office.
Okay, thank you, RJ, for that question. And we start with Ms. Brixie.
Well, thank you for the question. In addition to being a full voting member of the Township Board, the duties of the Treasurer's Office primarily include the collection of taxes and the collection and investment of all surplus funds. So on a practical basis, what that means is my office prints up the tax bills, sends them out, collects taxes for the township and all the other taxing entities, the schools, the county, and the like, disperses those funds, and invests and collects other surplus funds in the township. One interesting fact about the Township Treasurer's Office that many people do not realize is that the accounting for the township is not done in the Treasurer's Office. In fact, state statute prevents the Treasurer's Office from doing the accounting. In small townships, the accounting is done in the clerk's office, but because Meridian Township is a large township, we're the 8th largest township in the state, we have a full-time accounting department with a finance director who's an accountant, and that's where the accounting for the township is done. The reason that this practice is mandated by state statute statute is that we want to have separation of duties to protect the township against fraud and to create good internal controls. Internal controls are really important, and it's something that I take very seriously. So again, interesting fact is that accounting is not actually done in the treasurer's office, but rather in the accounting department.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Lindquist, same question as you see it.
Yes, well, you've mentioned the specific duties. Obviously, the collection of taxes is a very critical part of being the treasurer. Also, collecting the delinquent taxes is a very important part as well. Those are two areas I've got a great deal of experience in for my career. The points that Ms. Brixie made about the accounting functions being handled outside of the treasurer's office is something I did understand. And I do certainly support and encourage sound internal controls. As a certified fraud examiner in my practice with Lindquist and Associates, I've been doing quite a bit of consulting work and assistance with small businesses, in fact, in developing those internal controls. We need to, in addition to the investing or the collection of the taxes, the investing of the functions is also critically important. And another area where my experience, I think, comes into play in a very positive way is my relationship with investment opportunities and using Public Act 20 as a guideline to actually maximize the returns that the township can receive from those invested funds. Those are passive revenue dollars that come through, and it's something that the treasurer has direct responsibility for. So I would be looking forward to being able to make that a better performing asset for us in the township. Getting back to the internal control piece and having the accounting department not really functioning under the treasurer's department, I think there's still a specific advantage to having an experienced and a qualified accountant in that role of treasurer to be a partner with that department and to have conversations about what might be going well and what might not be going well. And we can do things that can help improve our internal controls and planning for the future.
All right, thank you very much. And now that you've both answered the question, I will give you the opportunity if you'd like a 30 seconds additional or a rebuttal. Okay, all right. So we go to our next question, and we have another caller. We have Neil from Hazlitt. Neil, go ahead with your question for the candidates.
Yes. Although it's not a violation of Michigan campaign finance law, do you think it's ethical to accept a campaign contribution from a business owner that has or could have a contract with the township that you have or could vote on?
Okay, thank you, Neil, for that question. And Mr. Lindquist, we start with you this time.
Thank you for the question, Neil. I think it's certainly in the world of ethics, that's another area. I keep throwing out my certification as a fraud examiner, but that's one thing in our code of ethics. It's a very strongly worded and very well-enforced aspect of the maintaining the certification. The ethical behavior of any individual, whether they're in elected office or not, is going to be held to a standard that if there is an appearance of conflict of interest, I think that is enough to separate yourself from the activity. So to specifically answer your question, Neil, about is it an ethical or is it a questionable practice to receive a contribution from someone who may come into your purview, I would say it would be something I would discourage. I would not look for that. I think it should be suggested to the person who's making the donation that they appreciate the offer, but it's not something that we can accept. And if there is if it does turn out that someone does accept something like that, then certainly you have to recuse yourself from any future conversations, which of course puts another burden on the elected official to make sure that that in fact happens.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Brixie, same question to you.
Thank you. I think that the importance of following campaign finance law to the letter is really critical, and I do that. The caller is asking if accepting a donation from someone that may have a contract with the township in the future or in the past is an ethical breach. It isn't something that is banned by campaign finance law. To give you an example of some of the ways that I look at the practice of accepting donations, I did receive during this campaign cycle, I did receive a donation from a developer, and the developer had given me a donation earlier in the primary when we didn't have any pending business for me. And then after the primary election, when my opponent filed for to become on the ballot, this person came to a fundraiser. I hadn't invited him. He came to a fundraiser and gave me another donation and said, here, this is for your general election campaign. And I refused the donation because at that time, the person had submitted a project to the township, which was before the Planning Commission at the time, right at the exact time that he was attempting to give me the donation. And I returned it to him because I felt to me that was improper. Now, it wasn't, it wouldn't have been a campaign violation for me to accept that, but because he had pending business immediately before us, I didn't think it was appropriate, and I refused it.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Lindquist, would you like 30 seconds additional?
I think she summed it up very well. Actually,
Okay.
the campaign finance law is in fact what we are governed by, and sometimes there's a layer beyond that, which Julie actually mentioned quite admirably, I think, and it's something that we should be all aspiring to.
Would you like 30 more seconds? Okay. Our next question, we go to Ann from Hazlitt. Ann, go ahead with your question, please.
Hello. I am curious for the candidates' thoughts on the high level of animosity and the very uncivil behavior of certain members of the township board in the last few years. It has been very unpleasant to observe, and I would like to listen to both candidates tell me why they think that has occurred and what they intend to do to stop it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ann. Animosity in the township board and what you plan to do, why you think it caused, and how you plan to stop it. We start with Ms. Brixie for that one.
Thank you, Ann, for the question. It has been very difficult at times over the past few years to make it through the board meetings. I see something happening in our own community that's happening at the national level, and that's this kind of acceptance of extreme, sometimes partisan opinions and beliefs and behaviors. And we've seen it in many of our public meetings through members of the public making very personal attacks to board members and to other members of the public, to each other, members of the audience, and that really should not be tolerated. We shouldn't be having members of the public be heckled when they're giving their opinion on something, and we as board members shouldn't have that happen to us either, whether it be coming from the public or from each other. Unfortunately, we have had a lack of leadership, and we have not enforced proper code of conduct amongst ourselves at the board level. I have made many attempts to enforce better behavior out of our board members, and if I've found oftentimes I may be the only woman present at the board, and I found myself the recipient of many of these attacks. And I really look forward to the change that will be coming with the new board, and I'm really looking forward to having a more collegial atmosphere at the board level. Our residents really deserve it, and our staff deserves a better atmosphere as well.
Mr. Lindquist, same question to you.
All right. Thank you, Ann. I was a little disturbed to hear you say you thought that because you're a woman you're having issues with civility on the board. I was present for a board meeting about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I guess, maybe a month ago, where you raised that issue as well. And I was puzzled by that because it certainly wasn't something I picked up from the conversation, and seemed to be taken through a whole different channel that I didn't recognize. And in fact, when I shared it with people, women I know who are watching the proceedings, they were also, frankly, kind of offended by the fact that you were using that in that context. They didn't see it. They thought it was inappropriate to say that you were being singled out because you were a woman. I've also seen the issues at the board meeting where things devolve into some pettiness, and I think I would agree that there has been a lack of leadership on some of those meetings, and we should do better with that, obviously. We should be interjecting and stopping conversations before they get spun out of control. But I think that the control has to be found within each one of us, and to listen to each other carefully and address whatever conflict or whatever issue or whatever debate issue is going on civilly and with respect for the other party. I would do that no matter whether it's man, woman, or whoever. You know, it's something that we just do as members of a board. I've sat on several boards, and I've never seen the proceedings devolve like I have in some of our township meetings. It's kind of sad, and I hope that we will, in fact, with the new board, recover a level of respectability, and that the public will be proud to say that we are representing them well and fairly and effectively.
Ms. Brixie, would you like 30 seconds to respond to that?
No.
Okay. Anything else additional? Your 30 seconds. Okay. Next, we have Kathy from Okemos. Kathy, what's your question for the candidates?
Yes. Last evening, I posed a question to the candidates for township supervisor regarding the township's current employee retirement program and its financial instability. Specifically, I asked what they would do to assure the citizens of Meridian Township that changes will be made to the township's employee retirement system that would reflect today's standards and protect the taxpayers from the exorbitant retirement cost associated with township's current defined benefit program and its excessively high multipliers that range from 2.0 to 2.75. I was disappointed that neither candidate offered to push for more moving to a defined contribution program for all new incoming employees and freeze the current employees' multiplier and negotiate a more reasonable multiplier. Although Mr. Stika did acknowledge that the multipliers needed to be looked at. For perspective, Michigan state government moved to a defined contribution program for all new employees in 1997, and the state multiplier in their defined benefit program was 1.5. So my question, do you support moving to a defined contribution program for new incoming employees and negotiating changes in the current defined benefit program for active employees while protecting commitments made to those already retired? Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy, for your question. Mr. Lindquist, we start with you for that one.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Kathy. This is obviously a very big issue right now in the township. The pension plan has been the main topic of conversation at several of our township board meetings. To answer your question directly, Kathy, about would I be willing to consider the defined contribution for new hires, I think that is something that has to be on the table as we go forward. We're obviously in the middle of negotiations right now with the bargaining units, so it would be unfair and unreasonable for us to really discuss details of that at this point. However, the problem we are facing right now is not one of just a small factor to try and correct it. We have a $45 million unfunded liability if we use a 5.75% discount rate, which is what the MERS people have shared with us in their last report. They've been historically using 8 or 7.75% most recently, and using a $30 million unfunded liability, which is also a scary number, but 45 is downright something we've got to work with now. It's unfortunate that it got to this point. Several years ago, we had a lower number. We didn't address it. We didn't speak up to start talking to MERS. We have only one pension plan that's a part of our pension board, of which our current treasurer sits on, and that plan's doing fine. But we had others, the police and fire pensions were all part of this MERS plan, and those have been slowly degrading over the last 8 years, and they have gotten much worse in the last couple of years because of the changes in the benefits and the actuarial studies of the age of the survivor, the benefit recipient. So we've got a big problem there. We've got a number of things we've got to look at. If we do change things, we have to look at this in terms of total compensation. So pensions and compensation are together. So it's a very complicated matter. It's not something we can solve in a couple of weeks or even a couple of months, but it's something I'm committed to doing. Thank you.
Ms. Brixie, same question to you.
I appreciate the caller asking in for the question, and I don't actually support the township moving to the defined contribution plan for the employees. And the reason is the rules have changed regarding calculations of the unfunded liability. And the example that was cited in the caller's question, the fund being converted back in 1997, the laws were different then. And when you look at the current standards that the state puts on the programs, you cannot have an open program if you change the new employees to a defined contribution plan. So if we were to do what was proposed, our unfunded liability would go from $27 million, which it is today, to something like $150 million, and we really would be in a very difficult and precarious financial situation trying to make payments on such a huge amount of unfunded pension liability. The $27 million pension liability that we've had, this year we made an extra $1 million payment to that, and we also, over the last 2 years, have been employing a strategy of prepaying our annual payment all in one lump sum at the beginning of the year. And the reason that we've been doing that is that we recognize that the interest rates for the township investments that we're allowed to invest in are very low, and the stock market performs a lot better. So we're letting township tax dollars work harder for us by putting all those dollars into the pension fund at the beginning of the year. Pensions are very tricky, very complicated, and we need to really study this fully in order to come up with a solution for it.
Mr. Lindquist, would you like to have
Sure,
an additional 30 seconds?
I think we could probably add some more conversation to that. The idea that we should not have it on the table at all, I think, is probably something we should not consider at this point. We've got a bigger issue here with this large number. I'm going to go back to the $45 million because that's truly what it is when MERS says that the discount rate is going to be at 5 3/4. Nobody's making 8% anymore. No one's making 7 3/4. I don't know how they ever thought that was possible in the past. So we've got a real challenge here. It's a big problem. We need to look at it now.
Thank you. Would you like an additional 30 seconds, Ms. Brixie?
Sure. The reason that I came up with this conclusion that the defined contribution conversion wasn't realistic was after 3 years of study with our finance director, our manager, and people from MERS. I advocated for changing to a defined contribution plan starting back in 2011, but after we studied the program, I realized it wasn't a viable solution. We do have other solutions. Meridian Township's not alone. East Lansing, Ingham County, many communities.
Sorry, I had to cut you off there. Apologize. Next, we have a tweet coming to us, and the tweet is from, I apologize, reading the handle, Nice Chertbro. The question is, what impact do tax appeals and the tax tribunal have on revenue for the township? So that is the first person to answer that one. We go to Ms. Brixie for that.
Thank you for the question, Chase. Tax appeals and the tax tribunal have a really negative impact on revenue for the township. The current administration that we have at the state level with Governor Snyder and his appointments that he's made to the tax tribunal have created an environment which really gives huge tax breaks to large corporations and specifically to big boxes. So one of the challenges that local communities throughout the state have faced over the past 4, 5, 6 years are that the big boxes come in and ask for tax appeals and ask to have their property valued under a different set of criteria than the local assessors are allowed to value them on. And one of the tragedies is that they're allowed to say, we should look at comparable stores to ours that are dark and cannot be rented out because there's deed restrictions on them that say they can't use another department store in there, and factor those dark stores in as a comparable. This results in really lower, much lower valuations than would otherwise be allowed for an active, open, thriving store. And the result on local revenues has been devastating. And that, combined with Proposal A, really make for a terrible environment. Meridian Township alone, we've lost in our community almost $2 million in tax revenues annually as a result of big box tax appeals.
Thank you. Mr. Lindquist, the tweet goes to you now.
Okay, well, I couldn't ask for a better answer than what Julie just gave, actually. I think that the big box stores are something we certainly share a concern about. When you get these big footprints in our community that are not contributing the same dollar amount that the other citizens are, I think that translates into a fairly unfair situation for the rest of us. And the comparison to a dark store is also one that has disturbed me from the first time I heard it. The opportunity to maximize revenues, obviously one of our foundations in a community is to have our property tax revenue come in from viable and active organizations and citizens. If we're going to be giving that money away or suppressing it to a level that makes it very difficult to replace, and using the example of the dark store, I think I couldn't believe that the first time I heard that years ago. It just didn't make much sense. So I think if we can push back from the local level, I know it's a state issue that we have to deal with, so it's frankly difficult when you're at the municipal or the township level making the appeal to the state level, but we have to do our testimony to the state and do as much grassroots activity as we can with our fellow townships around the state. It's got to be a common problem. We should be able to find a common solution.
Okay. Do you have additional comments you'd like to make? 30 seconds.
Thank you. We have actually testified before the state. I have been in close contact with my state representatives and senators, and the state has come up with a possible solution that they say to end the tax loophole, but unfortunately it's a little bit too late. Too little, too late, and the horse has really left the barn. So Meridian Township's going to be feeling the effects of this for decades.
Mr. Lindquist, 30 seconds. Glad to hear that Julie's going to the Capitol. That's exactly what I would expect to have happen, and it's exactly what I would be doing as well. I've experienced as a lobbyist, in fact, from my healthcare days with Aetna Health Plans, and did that very thing both at the state and the local and the federal level as well. Advocacy is a very big deal, and it does help move the chains, if you will, down the field when you are in a difficult situation.
Okay, thank you both. And I want to thank everyone for their tweets and Facebook comments and calls. We just want to let you know that we are going to try to get to you as quickly as possible, all of you, but thank you for participating thus far. And speaking of calls, we have Neil from Hazlitt on the line to ask a question. Go ahead, Neil.
Yes, I was wondering, what are your thoughts about the report from a citizen at the last board meeting concerning Mr. Lindquist's campaign materials being stolen and replaced by Brixie, Duchesne, and Opsamer campaign materials?
Okay, thank you, Neil, for the phone call and the question. And Mr. Lindquist, it goes to you first.
Okay, well, I guess they were my materials. Certainly disturbed me when I heard about that. It was one of my very close friends and supporters. It's going door to door, and it was a real eye-opener for her. I'm disappointed in that. I'm certain that my opponent was not directly involved in that, but it's something that I wish we could control. It's certainly talking about civility in board meetings, we should have civility in our election process as well. You know, we've had these things disappear, we've had signs disappear, I've had my signs disappear. I don't know if Julie's had the same experiences, but you know, this is an election. We're all trying to get to a point in our community where we can work together and have a civil election and be fair with each other. This was not good. It's like another black eye. It goes back to what we had during the primary there was a mail piece that went out that was very negative for a couple of the candidates, and it raised a lot of eyebrows in the community. Like, why are we doing this? Why are we leading our citizens to think that there's so many bad things going on with our elected officials? And I don't think there's a place for that in our community. We should be speaking of positive opportunities, positive aspects of our campaign, speak for ourselves, speak for our own attributes and what we can bring to the table and what we can bring to a position. And when it resorts to having to watch what happens to your materials after you walk away from a house, we shouldn't have to worry about that. We should just count on the citizen to be able to read that, make up their minds, their decisions, excuse me, based on what they're reading and what their questions are for us. That's what the open dialogue should be for us.
Ms. Brixie, same question to you.
Well, thank you, Neil. I appreciate the question and the opportunity to respond against the residents' allegation. When I first heard that, the first thing, of course, that came to mind was I think that everyone probably noticed the weather, and we have had an incredible amount of wind over the past few weeks. This is one of the windier falls that we've had in my experience. The second thing that came to mind was I wondered if we were being I wondered about the report about the materials left on the door, because Ron Steica's materials should have been left along with Mr. Deschaines and Mr. Opsimer and my own materials, because we have been working together and we have been passing out each other's material. In addition, depending on what precinct it was, we may have had a county commissioner's materials out there as well. In any campaign season, this is my 5th election. This is going to be my 5th term on the township board. In every election cycle, I have had many signs stolen and vandalized. In the beginning, I always thought, oh, it was my opponent that was doing it. But with time, I began to realize that some people just vandalize signs, kids, whoever. It has been windy. I know earlier in the primary, there were some incredible windstorms that took trees down, not to mention blowing away political campaign signs. In terms of ethics, you know, regarding the suggestion that I stole Mr. Lindquist's literature, I didn't. I have no desire to do that. You see campaign literature in the street when you're out knocking doors because the wind blows it away, or someone knocks it off the door, goes in the house, a kid kicks it off to the side. Who knows what happened to it?
Thank you very much. Mr. Lindquist, would you like 30 more seconds?
Sure. Well, actually, for the record, I didn't say that you took the signs, Julie. I said that I was sure that you didn't, in fact. That might have been something that you couldn't control. And I know the day that this happened, and it was not windy, and it might have been actually before Mr. Steica started doing some campaign work with you, but it was specific, and it was an hour or two after the materials were dropped off, and there was nothing left on the floor or the ground. So I have pretty strong confidence that what happened actually happened.
And Ms. Brixie, another 30 seconds.
Sure. One time during the primary, I went to a door and there was a piece of literature on the door. And again, I was working with a group of people and I had quite a large amount of material, and I had knocked on the door and no one was there. The screen was open. And I was putting the material on the door and I carefully put it in there. And the man came out behind the curtain. He said, "You must be a Democrat and I'm voting for you because you left that Republican flyer in the handle. And if you were a Republican, you would have taken it." So.
Thank you. I want to again thank everyone for their calls and their participation, and we've got a lot of volume, so we'll get to you as quickly as possible. But right now we go to Brett from Meridian Township. Go ahead with your question, Brett. Phone call.
Thank you. So development is clearly a big issue in the township and how development occurs. There's been a number of student apartment complexes going up around the township. And a clear majority of township board members seem to keep supporting the development of these large, high-density apartment complexes. Please share with me, each candidate, your views on high-density apartment complexes, some of which get occupied by students, and I'd like to know your views on how that affects the township in the long run and the impact on an infrastructure and other aspects of the township.
Okay, thank you for your question, and we begin with Ms. Brixie for that one.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Dreyfus. Township has a duty to hear all of the applications that come before us. And in the time that I've been on the Township Board, I've seen a great variety of different projects come before us. I've voted for some of them. I've voted against some of them. It really depends on the project and the criteria of the rezoning or the application that we have before us. There were several apartment complexes that I approved that were in close proximity to Michigan State University. I think it was appropriate. It fit with our master plan for development, and it really makes a lot of sense to put students near the university. There's been other projects that I've voted against. Right here next to the township offices, we had a request for an apartment building and a grocery store, and I voted no on that. Clerk Dreyfus voted for that project, but I voted against it. I didn't think it was the right project for the area, and I would have preferred to see something different there. So I'm going to continue to evaluate each and every apartment complex application that comes before us, just like I would any other type of application that comes before us, on the merits of the project. We have criteria. We need to follow the criteria. Students are a really important part of our local economy, and students are an important part of this region. One of the things that I think we need to do is find a way to keep students in our area after they graduate from school and get them to want to live, work, and stay here in Meridian Township after they begin to work full-time in their careers.
Mr. Lindquist, same question.
Right. Thank you, Brett. The issue of high-density student housing is one I've been talking to a lot of residents about as I go door to door. It's one that is of great concern to many of the residents. They see these things popping up along Grand River, over by the university, and the density issue is one that is of great concern. I know it's also of concern to the folks over at Michigan State University. I understand recently they even came and spoke to our township about the overbuilding of student housing, and perhaps we should be considering other types of structures or other types of development that would be compatible for perhaps businesses or spin-offs from our universities. For example, the FRIB is going to be doing a lot of high-level physics. I think it would be a good idea to work with our planning commission and work with our master plan to start to focus on putting structures in place that would draw residents here from around the state, around the country, and student housing, high-density student housing, is not one that fits into that criteria or in that solution. I think that some of the locations of these facilities are going to be putting a stress on our police and fire. We already know that crime has been reported in higher numbers at some of these high-density locations. And I think I'm listening to the residents. They're not real happy seeing these things popping up everywhere. There was one structure that came up across the backyard of one of my neighbors where I lived before, and that they weren't aware of it until it happened at the last minute, and they were unable to stop it. And now they've got someone sitting in a balcony looking at their backyard. There's another complex down along Okemos Road that I think is kind of an interesting location because it's the only residence that has a direct access to Okemos Road from a residence. And it was originally thought to be a business, and it changed over to apartment buildings.
Okay. Ms. Brixie, would you like a rebuttal?
Sure. I think it's really important for us to look to the long range and make sure that we come up with a mix of housing types that will be right for our community. And one of the things that we're doing right now is updating our master plan. It's really important for us to make sure that we revitalize our commercial areas and bring life into these older areas that we have, Carriage Hills, Hazlitt Village Square, and downtown Okemos. I think that's something that's really important.
Mr. Lindquist, would you like more time? 30 seconds?
Sure. Housing is one thing, but places where people work is another. I think that we've got to look at both of those things. As I sat in on the master plan presentation back in September, and it was a very good conversation. We've got a lot of plans going on for especially our three focused areas in the township. Carriage Hills is certainly a big deal, and certainly the Hazlitt marketplace as well. I'm looking forward to working on those areas, looking for places where we can build businesses and housing, and that would make a better mix, in my view, for the community.
Okay, thank you. We're just over about 15 minutes left in the program, and right now we get to go to a tweet. We have Matt Kulju. I apologize if that handle is wrong, the way the pronunciation. But the question, regardless, is explain your approaches to customer service. And for this one, we start with Mr. Lindquist.
Great. Customer service is a very big deal. I don't see a light on any place. There we go. Okay. Customer service is something that I've been dealing with my entire career. In fact, recently I was actually a small business owner here in Okemos. I owned a flooring store. You don't sell your product if you're not giving good customer service. In the Treasurer's office, we have customer service that's being offered for obviously the payment of the taxes. We're offering online service, which I send kudos over to Ms. Brixie for setting a lot of those up, and working with the banks and other intermediaries that can help get the tax dollars in here. I think we could do some better things there. I think there's always opportunity to improve in customer service. We've got an issue, I think, with our friends at the MSU Federal Credit Union, where we are unable to accept their payments, and they're the largest credit union, I think the largest university-owned credit union in the nation, and I think it would be great if we could make a relationship with them work. It's not easy. I know I've worked with a number of financial institutions over the years, and if it means there's a labor issue that we have, I've heard that explanation why we couldn't do it. I haven't been in the middle of those conversations, so I can't answer specifics about that, but I would certainly want to strive to have issues where customers are not put at risk or being asked to pay late fees because when they thought they paid promptly and it turns out it ended up a day or two or maybe later and they're getting charged a late fee for not paying the property tax timely when they believe they had, that's not really great customer service, and we should do everything we can to serve the needs of our citizen and help them pay their taxes timely and recognize their intent and their activity, especially if they made their payment prior to the due date.
Okay. And Ms. Brixie, Matt's tweet to you.
Thanks very much for the question, Matt. I have really placed a premium focus on customer service throughout my 8 years here at Meridian Township. I introduced electronic ACH payments for taxes, and then shortly thereafter made that a recurring payment option due to customer demand. I put into place online Visa debit card acceptance for property taxes. I also made it possible for people to use bridge cards at the farmers market so that people who are the recipients of bridge cards can have the opportunity to purchase fresh fruits and vegetables. And I also helped reduce long lines in the Treasurer's office on tax day. Another thing that I've done that highlights my customer service is that last year, due to a series of unfortunate events, we were doing a parking lot repaving project, and our main parking lot was torn up during the week that the summer taxes were due. Summer tax week is the busiest week of the year for my office. We have thousands of taxpayers that come in to pay during that week. I was very concerned that our elderly and residents and those residents with disabilities were going to have a really hard time getting from the remote parking lot over to my main office. So I worked together with a great team here at the township, and we put into place a curbside tax tent, and we also provided a tax taxi, we called it, which was a golf cart donated by Meridian Sun Golf Club, to get those residents who needed to get into the building a ride so that they could get there closer if they needed it. And this is all an example of my focus on customer service. It's really important for us.
Okay, Mr. Lindquist, would you like to take an additional 30 seconds?
Sure. Those are all great things, Julie. I think those are things that any good manager of a function that deals with customers would expect to have happen. We want to look at the future. We want to look at opportunities, ACH payments, credit cards. Those are things that are happening right now in the retail world. And so I applaud you for that. I think that's something that anybody, I would certainly be doing it myself in that role. And the golf cart was a great idea. Probably be used again.
Ms. Brixie, 30 seconds.
Sure. One of the things that was mentioned was the idea that If my opponent were to be elected treasurer, he would not charge people a late fee for their taxes if they thought they made the payment on time. And I think that might have some really negative ramifications, because you have to treat everyone the same way. And when you have a tax bill that goes out on July 1st and it's not due until September.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to stop you there. I apologize. Time came up, but we do have another call now for the candidates. Georgia from Okemos. Georgia, what's your question?
I would like to know from both of the candidates their attitudes about special millages. Have they supported special millage elections in the past, such as those for parks, roads, and libraries? And what is their position on the Potter Park millage that's on the November ballot?
Okay, thank you for that question, and we start with Ms. Brixie for that one.
Well, thank you very much for the question, Georgia. One of the great things about living here in Meridian Township is witnessing firsthand the generosity and the passion of our residents. I'm so glad that the law allows us to place special millages on the ballot and allow our residents to decide if they want to fund something above and beyond our general operating millage. I do support the renewal of the Potter Park Zoo millage. I think that the zoo is a regional asset, a regional jewel, and something that many of our residents really appreciate. I know that I appreciate it. I've taken my children there. I've had many, many fond memories there. I like to ride my bike on the river trail and pass through the zoo area. The libraries, I'm a big, huge supporter of our libraries. I've worked very hard in the community to raise money for both of our libraries. I helped raise over $20,000 for the Hazlitt Library move, and then when we had Renew the Okemos Library, I helped raise over $20,000 for that project too. We've got a lot of great assets in Meridian Township, and it's the voters' choice whether or not to support these things, and I fully support the idea that people have a right to make a decision in their taxation and make the decision themselves whether or not to support something through a special millage. Our Trails millage is another one that really had a lot of support when it came recently over the summer to renew and put the Headley override on that. We've got some really exciting trails projects coming up between the county millage and the township millage, and I look forward to seeing them implemented here in the township.
Mr. Lindquist, same question to you.
Thank you. Of course, special millages are certainly important at some points when we have unexpected needs, or we have things like our zoo, the Potter Park Zoo millage, which is coming up. I think that is a great location as well. I love zoos. I've gone to the Potter Park Zoo, San Diego Zoo, Detroit Zoo, Washington Zoo, and DC. They're great destinations. They bring families there, and it's a good afternoon of fun. The issue of when you have a millage offered to the public, though, and I think it's pretty much with any of these that are outside the normal millage schedule that we have, we need to have a very good detail of what that money is going to be spent for. I've seen some millages presented that are sort of vague in what the money will ultimately be spent on, and I think that citizens should have an opportunity to get deep into the detail on those things. They might not always have that, and if we can be disclosing specifics about where the millage money is going to be spent and how it will be spent and how long it will last, that would be very informative, and it helps in the transparency of running our government. When we have needs for these things, libraries, I go to the library every single week. I get 2 or 3 books, sometimes more. I'm an avid reader, and it's something that's part of many people's lives. We need to support these things. It's good rounding of a lifestyle and help you become a better citizen when you are well informed. So all these elements, when they're needed, we need to share the information with our citizens. We need to be specific, and when we have other issues pop up that might also be impacting, they should know what other potential dollars might be coming down the road for additional millage money that we'll be taking out of their pockets for other special needs. I think that's a concern we have when some citizens, they go, okay, well, I'm going to do this, what's next? And that's part of citizen involvement, and we need to help them learn what.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to stop you there. But we have 30 more seconds. So, Ms. Brixie, would you like 30 seconds? And okay, so now I can offer you 30 seconds. Would you like to continue?
I think I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. I want to thank everyone for calling. If you're on hold on the line and you've gotten through, we're going to finish up with the calls we have. Just for anyone in the future, I want to let you know that additional calls we're not going to be able to take anymore. But we do have a tweet right now, and that is from handle Just Libby. Just Libby asks, how did Proposal A impact the township, and are those impacts relevant today? And the first person to answer that question goes to Mr. Lindquist.
I was afraid of that. What is the Proposal A? I don't know what that is. I don't get to answer that. I'll have to. If without knowing what Proposal A is, I can hardly respond to what the impacts of it would be.
Okay.
So I'll have to pass, I guess, on that.
Okay. All right. And so then we'll go to Ms. Brixie.
Thank you. Thank you, Libby, for that question. Well, Proposal A, while it had the positive effect on taxpayers of reducing their property tax bills by changing the way that school funding was managed throughout the state, it had some really negative, unforeseen consequences as we went through the Great Recession. Proposal A stated that when you purchase a home and live in that home, the value of your property cannot rise above either the rate of inflation or 4%, whichever was lower. And so this was put into effect in the late 90s when property values were rising and rising and rising, and people were frustrated that, that each year their taxes were going up and up and up. What the authors of Proposal A failed to do was to picture a scenario where property values would fall. What would have been fair would be to have Proposal A work in reverse and say if property values are falling, then we're only going to let them fall either at the rate of inflation or by 4%. But that isn't, in fact, what happened. And so when we went through the Great Recession and property values plummeted, local communities immediately felt the effects of the reduced revenue. And then when property values began to increase, of course, inflation rates have been incredibly low. So our recovery from the Great Recession at local communities, local governments, relying on the revenue from property taxes has really been hampered. And that's something that's been really unfortunate. And if I might continue and request an additional 30 seconds. I
can give you 30 seconds after I give Mr. Lindquist the opportunity if he wants to follow up or rebuttal.
Thank you.
30 seconds.
Now that I have the refresher from Ms. Brixie, I appreciate that. It sounds very much like the Headley Amendment and other things that have been done over the years to restrict the growth of property tax dollars. And when we are dealing with issues that have a material impact on the collections to the township, we need to be obviously planning for that ahead and create our budgets accordingly. I don't have a lot of time. Thank you.
Ms. Brixie, 30 seconds.
Thank you. The other negative impact of Proposal A goes back to these dark store devaluations that we've seen with the big boxes. So all the big boxes in the state had their taxes dramatically reduced, and now as a result of Proposal A, even when the property values increase, the local communities won't see that because inflation has been so very low.
Thank you very much. And now we have a question from Joyce. Joyce from Hazlitt, go ahead with your question.
Yes, thank you. In your current position or a prior position that you've had, have you been part of an independent financial audit? And if so, what was the outcome of that audit?
Okay, thank you, Joyce, for that question. Ms. Brixie, you get to start this one.
Thank you for the question, Joyce. Of course, here at Meridian Township, every year we do have an independent audit, and I'm very happy to report that we haven't had any issues with our audits since I've been treasurer. And in fact, we have received the Excellence in Financial Reporting Award from the Michigan Government Finance Officers Association each of the years that I've been treasurer. On a different note, earlier this year, CATA had their audit presentation in the spring, and the audit was presented to the CATA board, of which I'm a member. I'm one of the township's 2 representatives on the CATA board. And the audit covered the brief amount of time that my opponent worked at CATA. And unfortunately, the auditors reported to us that they had encountered difficulties in performing the audit. And they also revealed that there were some material weaknesses and significant deficiencies related to internal controls. And that's something that is really important, because internal controls are the way that we prevent and detect fraud and correct any kind of financial misstatements that may have occurred.
Okay, Mr. Lindquist, same question to you.
Thank you, Joyce. Since you brought up the topic of CATA's audit, I think I should probably put some meat on those bones. The audit that you were talking about, I was there for the entire year. I was there for 2 years and about a year and not 10 months. That was the second audit we had, and we had changed audit firms for the second year. In my first year at CATA, we had one firm, and we had good audit on that one. But in my second year, I wanted to have a stronger firm from a regional firm that had done other transportation entities. It's a whole different thing. We had a whole different scope involved too. For the previous audit, we had about 30 documents requested, and from the audit from the 2015 period, they requested over 600 documents. For the department that had a 100% turnover during that period, it was a tremendous burden. I was the 4th financial director in 4 years at CATA. The issues internal to the finance department are issues I don't think are appropriate to bring up in this venue. However, I think it's important for the viewers to know that these are things that happen when you have turnover, when you have a software system that is not cooperative with the users, and the changes that need to be made are pretty large, and it was a very difficult process. During that last year as well, I was unable to be as focused on it as I would like to. During the fall, when the auditors first arrived, I began developing a health issue that led to an emergency surgery in January, so I was frankly unable to participate in a great deal of that audit. The internal control issues were not the types of material control issues that my opponent is referring to. They would, for example, there was one that there was an inability to verify that the report that was done online was signed off on, and that was something that even the auditors said that would be a difficult thing to support, that we need to develop something like that. It's a number of things. Anybody who's gone through an audit with an outside accounting firm knows that sometimes.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off there and offer 30 additional seconds if you'd like, Ms. Brixie.
Sure. One of the significant deficiencies that was mentioned was that accounts were not being reconciled timely during the entire fiscal year that my opponent was responsible for those duties, and also journal entries weren't being made. And these are very basic things that should have been taken care of under good practices of internal controls.
Mr. Lindquist, would you like 30 seconds?
Sure. Those are pretty strong statements there, and they aren't actually accurate to what the activity was. The reconciliations you're referring to were actually done on paper, and we had someone leave the office, retire actually, in August, and when they left, the documents could not be located. They were contacted repeatedly by phone. They did not return phone calls. That was the problem with that, and we had other issues with the software, which made it difficult to call up balances and show the information to the auditor.
Okay, thank you very much. You're going to notice by your clock that we're going to go a little bit over because we've got one last call. We're going to take this one last call from Paul. Paul from Hazlitt, what's your question for the candidates?
This is another question related to CATA, and that is with their proposed bus rapid transit. This is a two-part question. First part, what are their positions with respect to necessity for this project, and the other thing is the long-term fiscal solvency responsibility with respect to this project.
Okay, thank you, Paul, for your question. This one we begin with Mr. Lindquist.
Thank you. Having worked at CATA, I was quite familiar with the BRT, although I had not heard of it until I got to work at CATA in 2014. I am not in favor of this project. I think it is on several levels. There's a cost issue, there's a safety and security issue, there is a convenience and traffic issue, and we also have an issue with our disabled and blind residents. On the cost side, it's $139 million, $140 million that would be costing to build $15 million per mile. Now, it's federal tax money, or it's a grant that's coming through, and a small starts grant for $99 million. And there's about $25 million coming from the state of Michigan through MDOT, and then the balance is local. That, I think, is an outrageous amount of money to spend for 10 minutes of savings between the Meridian Mall and the Capitol. The raised median raises issues for things like fire trucks and ladder trucks in particular. When we've queried this with our local safety and security folks, they expressed the concern that it would be difficult to make U-turns even with a median that could be modified so that they could drive over it. The distance to make the U-turn is just simply not possible with the width of Grand River. There's a significant modification that would have to be made. On the center running, we have great numbers of our disabled community which are not happy with the fact that they would have to cross lanes of traffic to get to their stations. That is something that is pretty much a no-starter for many of them. And on the operational costs of it, a question that I had been asking consistently since I left CATA in April was what is in fact the additional operating cost, because I had seen it before I left and that was not being disclosed until our community meetings 2 weeks ago. $2.8 million was the figure we heard now for the cost over and above the existing Route 1 that is running right now. If we eliminated the Entertainment Express, eliminate Route 1, and add in the BRT costs, it's an extra $2.8 to $3 million to run this.
Going to have to stop you there. Ms. Brixie, your turn. Same question.
Thank you. In general, I support improvements to public transit, and I support public transit. I think everyone can agree that the Michigan Grand River Avenue corridor is really kind of a congested mess right now and really needs some kind of improvement. It's very pedestrian unfriendly. In Meridian Township's portion, you've got 5 lanes of traffic with distances of up to a mile with no way for anyone to get across, and yet people who are using public transit today have to cross 5 lanes of traffic. So I think something needs to be done. A bus rapid transit system is something that could accomplish an improvement to the corridor. I think that CATA has proposed the project and is in the process of applying for the federal funding. As part of that process, they've gone through a lot of public input, and we've heard a lot of concerns from residents, and we've heard concerns from business owners. We've heard concerns from the bicycling community. And I really look forward to being able to work with the future board and work with CATA to address the concerns that have been raised through this process. There's a lot of time and opportunity left in the federally mandated process for the project for us to get the changes that we're looking for. Specifically, I don't like it that Frandor Shopping Center has been cut out of the BRT route. I think that should be added back in. I think the shopping destinations like Frandor, Meyer, and Meridian Mall are really critical to the region in order for the public transit to succeed. So those things really need to be addressed.
Mr. Lindquist, would you like 30 seconds?
Sure, thank you. Well, I wish you'd said something about the Frandor stop a while ago, Julie, because that's been off the table for as long as I've looked at the BRT. It only became an issue when we started raising it in these dialogues at the township, when we decided that we wouldn't be supporting it at the township level. The number of reduced stops is a problem, and if we could achieve many of these things that the BRT promotes or proposes that will happen simply by some of these simple steps, like reducing the number of stops and streamlining the traffic flow by having synchronized lights. It simply isn't necessary.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Brixie, would you like 30 seconds?
Sure. One of the things that I think we need to have improvements in our corridor for is for safety. We had a gentleman get struck by a car and die earlier this year in January just trying to cross the street. We have to make the Grand River Corridor safer. We have to.
Thank you both, and I want to thank everyone who participated in this evening's debate, tweets, Facebook questions, and phone calls. Obviously, we've gone over, but now we're going to offer our candidates the opportunity to make a 30-second closing statement. With introductions, we started alphabetically with Ms. Brixie, and so for closing statements, we're going to start with Mr. Lindquist. And Mr. Lindquist, 30 seconds.
Thank you very much. Erik Lindquist, candidate for treasurer. I'm a non-party affiliation candidate. You'll find me on the ballot with a non-party affiliation designation. We can't know what's around the corner, but we can know what we want to have in place when that future comes into our view. I am the candidate who is qualified as a treasurer by the means of having an accounting degree, and I've had a wealth of experience. You need to choose the candidate, please, to handle the future financial and treasury.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Brixie, final closing statement, 30 seconds.
Thank you. I am a certified public funds investment manager and a certified Michigan municipal treasurer. I take my job very seriously. I take pride in the customer service that I've implemented while I've been treasurer. We're in great financial shape here at the township. We have over $6 million fund balance, and we have a new fire truck and 2 new ambulances, all purchased without accruing any more debt. Please check out.
Thank you very, very much. I want to thank both candidates for participating. Thank you for your patience with me keeping the time. And thank you for watching the Meridian Township Treasurer Debate. Join us live on Tuesday, October 25th, for not 1, but 2 debates. Join us from 7 to 8 p.m. for the Ingham County Prosecutor Debate with Republican candidate Billy Joe O'Barry and Democratic candidate Carol Seaman. And then from 8 to 10 p.m. for the Meridian Township Trustee Debate with Republican candidates Brian Zubak, Deborah Lee Piper, and Jared S. Wilson, and the Democratic candidates Phil DeShane, Patricia Herring-Jackson, and Dan Upsummer, and Kathy Ann Sunland. As a reminder, HOMTV's Ballot Meridian election coverage is available online all the time at www.hometv.net. I'm Erik Sherman. Thank you very much for watching.